Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages. You know, I love podcasting. I have since 2006, back when you had to use like a Dixie cup with string to make the thing work. And that's why I'm so excited that we recently moved Mysterious Goings On to Anchor FM to record our podcast. I gotta tell you, I don't regret it a bit. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. I'm not going to lie to you, when I first heard about Anchor, I was a little dubious because I've been doing it the hard way for so long. But I got to tell you, it's very easy. Use a Stripe account. Get sponsors. You're not paying monthly hosting fees. The sound quality is great. The distribution is phenomenal. Friends, download the free Anchor app today if you want to start your own podcast, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Remember, you heard it here first on Mysterious Goings On.
Hey, this is Gently. I'm the host of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and you are listening to the Mysterious Goings On podcast.
You know, I've said it once, I've said it a million times. Chicago is my kind of town. I'm telling you. The only thing I don't care for about Chicago, I'll be honest with you, is that they claim they have pizza and they don't. They have quiche. They have a big casserole. That's what they have. But they do not have real pizza. I'm sorry. I'm not from New York City. I'm not from Chicago. I'm from the great Midwest, but I'm a New York City pizza guy. But hopefully this will not ruin this interview we're getting to do with Michelle Cox. She is the author of the Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, as well as Novel Notes of Local Lore, a weekly blog dedicated to Chicago's forgotten residents and their pizza. I'm kidding, not the pizza. Her books have won over 50. Are you ready for this? 50 international awards, and have been praised by Kirkus, which is no mean feat, by the way, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, Booklist, Foreword, Elle, Redbook, Brit&Co, Popsuger, Buzzfeed, and so many more. Will run out of time. Unbeknownst to most, she hoards board games she doesn't have time to play. And I'm kind of that way too. I got to talk about that. And is, not surprisingly, addicted to period dramas and big band music. Also, marmalade. As I said, she lives in Chicago with her husband, 3 kids, and 1 naughty golden doodle, and is hard at work on her latest novel. Oh my goodness, Michelle Cox, welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Oh my gosh, thanks, Alex. That was a great intro. Except for the pizza part, Chicago pizza is definitely number 1. Come on.
Are you serious? You really think it's better to have this big brick of stuff instead of just something you could fold up and no?
Well, to be honest, I do love thin crust the best. I mean, that's the truth. But we have good thin crust.
I no doubt. And actually, my my college roommate, one of my best friends in the world, lives in Chicagoland. Oh. And whenever I visit, he's just like, "You're going to get real pizza, and you're going to like it." I'm like, "Okay, fine, all right, fine." Michelle, I got to tell you something. I had not read your series, but you're one of those authors I dread, because you come on the show and I've already looked up all your stuff and I'm like, oh man, that's like 3 or 4 more books I got to put on my nightstand. Do you know how tall my nightstand is after doing this show for 5 years already? But I looked at this and I am enamored with what you're doing here, and I'm looking forward to reading it. So I would just like to throw it to you, if you don't mind. Tell us about this series, the genesis of it, whatever you want to talk about. Let's get rolling on this.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. The Henrietta and Inspector Howard series is set in the 30s in Chicago, and it is kind of a Downton Abbey meets Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries. So there are 5 books out so far. I'm working on the 6th, and it's not your typical mystery series. It's kind of a genre blend. So sometimes it wins awards for historical fiction, sometimes mystery, sometimes romance. So it's really more about these characters and how they're developing across the whole series, not so much the same stock characters just solving a different mystery each time. So it's a little bit different.
Okay, regular listeners to the shows will know that Alex's spidey sense is tingling because that's exactly the kind of books I do definitely read. That's the kind of books I write, by the way. I just can't stand this where they're like frozen in amber and they throw a new mystery on them. I don't want to say it, but I will. A lot of Agatha Christie, right? It's kind of, they're just, yeah, I can't do it. In fact, it took Albert Finney and Kenneth Branagh to bring Poirot to life for me. It did. Just saying. I love this. So let's, before we get into, I love talking about series like yourselves, like yours, that straddle different genres. And we can talk about that in the context of how marketing works down the road, because I want to talk about the business in a little bit. But let's go back. Where did you get this? What was the germ that started this series for you?
Well, I came to writing sort of late, and when I wrote a different whole giant gargantuan novel that never got published, and I decided to start over, and I thought that what would be popular with an agent would be mystery. Little did I know. But I decided at the time, okay, I'm going to go for this mystery thing. And I was only going to write one book. It wasn't going to be a series. So I thought, you know what, I can pull this off. So but I needed an idea. And so I used to work in a nursing home in the city on the Northwest side. It was called the Bohemian Home for Orphans and the Aged. So by the time I got there in the 90s, there were no more orphans, but it was this really rich, community of residents most were immigrants who had lived through, some amazing times in Chicago, the 30s, 40s primarily, which is also the basis of the blog. But I took one story that really resonated with me. It was a woman who was this beautiful bombshell, and she worked at the Chicago World's Fair in the 30s. And she had this amazing life, and she had all these crazy jobs. And she used to tell me that she had once upon a time a man stopping body and a personality to go with it. And
Nice.
she was just this amazing person. So I decided to base the character of Henrietta on her. So a lot of what happens in book one actually was taken from her life. So the whole burlesque club, I mean, there wasn't the murderer and there wasn't the inspector and all of that, but a lot of what is in book one, A Girl Like You, really did happen. And then after that, I decided to turn it into a series. And of course, it got more fictional as we went along, but yeah, that's how it started. Real person.
I love hearing this because I have parallels here too. And by the way, the trap of being on my show is Alex always compares everybody who's in the chair across from him to himself. So here we go.
Why not?
But no,
Why not?
But same thing. My series was going to be a one-off. It happened because I used to work at a small university in Nebraska, in a small town. And one day they dumped this big file on my desk, and it's a true life first school shooting from 1953 or something. I took that, and from there, once that book was done, there was a whole series for me. Yeah. Wasn't planning it, right? Just like you.
Right.
By the way, incidentally, I also worked in a nursing home for a while myself. And I'll tell you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the look on your face is so great. You're like, he's making that up. No, I did. My office was in a I was the PR and marketing director for a large group of them, but my office was in a nursing home. The people I met, the stories you hear, the lives, right? Do you know what always, I'm getting off on a little tangent here. Do you know what always got me is like, if I got invited to a residence room, and there would be usually a lovely framed black and white photo of them when they were youthful. Mm-hmm. And you talk about the woman who had the body that wouldn't quit and all that stuff. And you just look and you think, oh, these people were not always at the end of the road. They were just like me. They had health and vigor and lust and dreams. And I love that. And, I think, yeah. I remember saying this to a friend at the time. I said, I think if I ever go into a facility like that someday, I want to get the best picture I've ever took of myself when I was a younger man and just wear it as a button, just to remind people, hey, this desiccated husk that is Alex now used to be, okay looking. And, but no, I love true. That you did. It is true. And Did you just kind of by osmosis of working around this woman just kind of pick things up, or did you become pretty friendly, I guess, or maybe you said that?
No, I mean, what you're saying is so true. People used to ask me at the time, like, what a depressing job. How can you stand it? And I'm like, no, it really isn't. I mean, it is depressing in a way, but you are filled with, you're surrounded by so much history and so much life. And I tell writing groups, if you're stuck for an idea, go sit in a nursing home for a couple of weeks and you'll have more stories than you could ever use. I mean, there's just so much there. And if you take the time to actually sit next to somebody, I mean, eventually their story will come out. And that was my job. Is I started as the admissions director, and that was a
Ah.
terrible disaster. I was like, 23 or something, and I didn't realize that I was supposed to be chasing ambulances and like schmoozing discharge staff and trying to fill beds. And I just wanted to be with the residents and like sit with them and, find their sweater or help them with a roommate. So the administrator said, this isn't really working. We're going to switch you into social service. And then that was like my dream job, because then, even though I didn't have any social work background, but then it was my job to sit with these people and, hear their story. And I was supposed to write literally a paragraph. I was supposed to sum up their life in a paragraph and stick it in the chart. And fortunately, because we didn't have very much oversight, I mean, I would just, and no one stopped me, I would just sit with them for like a week, and which was great for them and great for me. And I would write their entire life story and I would stick that in the chart, and the staff loved it. They're like, oh my gosh, we read Mr. Jones's story. It was amazing. I'm like, I know, wasn't it? So it was just a really neat situation, and it would never ever come again. But I, took it while I had the chance. So.
Oh, bless you, because I know that meant so much to those folks. And chasing charge nurses is not fun. I know. My whole staff had to do that, and even I was like, "Oh, that's a tough job." But let's move on to the series itself. So we're on how many books here? 5 now.
Yeah, 5.
And you started, was it 2016? Was that the first one, right around there?
Right. Yeah.
And let me ask you. So what was the path you took to publication on that first one? Did you get an agent, or try to get an agent, or did you self, or what did you do?
Well, it kind of goes back to the short answer is I'm with She Writes Press, which is a hybrid press. So that's a press that sort of lives between traditional and self-publishing. And the reason I went that route is because when I was trying to sell the big gargantuan novel, that went nowhere, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about writing. I didn't know anything about publishing. Nothing. It was, it was kind of a challenge to see if I could just write a book. It wasn't really to get published or be famous or anything like that. But after a year of trying to get it published at the instigation of family and friends, they're like, oh, you should try to publish it. I'm like, well, I don't know. That wasn't really the goal. And then, so I tried to get into this. And then I realized that, I was clearly doing something wrong. So I went to the Writer's Digest conference in New York and tried to learn, what I was doing wrong. And turns out a lot. But yeah, what surprised me though about the conference was that there seemed to be a lot of negativity even at that time with traditional publishing about how hard it was to get into, and once you were in, you basically lost control of your creative effort, and it was basically like, here's a check, and it probably a small one at that compared to earlier times, and that was it. So I happened into a webinar, or not a webinar, but a panel where an agent was discussing this new third way of publishing, which was a hybrid press. And I thought it sounded amazing. And I was looking around at people like, you guys hearing this? This is awesome. So I had written this book while I was waiting around for this other book to get published. I wrote the first book, A Girl Like You, and I had intended, like I said earlier, to attract an agent with this. And after going to this conference, I'm like, you know what? I I don't know if I really want an agent. I don't know if I want to be traditionally published. I really like this idea of the hybrid press. And so when I got back, I did some research and I contacted She Writes Press and submitted a girl actually to be here's the truth. I submitted the Gargantuan novel to them and they said no. They're like, it's good writing, but this doesn't fit. So I said, well, how about this other novel? And they liked it and they took it. So that was kind of the start of the whole series. And I think it's ironic that I wrote this book for an agent and never ended up showing it to even one agent. I just took it directly to She Writes Press. So
kind of similar. My deal, I was actually my first book in my series. I'd sent it out to over 100 agents. I got a few requests for partials, one for a full, and I thought, I got this. This is happening. And the one who really wanted the full was giving me a nice note, and she said she was thinking about it. And of course, then it was 2008. The bottom dropped out of the economy. She basically was just like, no, it ain't happening. So I kind of put my book aside, just like you. And I thought, well, I've got it. I didn't go hybrid immediately. I did it myself, and it suffered because I wish I could have had like an organization like your press over me to kind of help me not make as many dumb mistakes as I did, but all worked out. So let me ask, if you don't mind, just even on a general level, what is if for people who don't fully understand? I mean, self-publish is obviously you do it all soup to nuts, or maybe you do it and then you contract out editing and cover and all that. So does the hybrid publisher kind of say, okay, we're working with you, we've got a stable for covers, we've got a stable of people who edit? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with a hybrid press, the concept is that the author helps fund the project. So you pay a fee, an upfront fee, and the sort of back end of that is that you retain creative control and you also make a higher percentage of the royalties. So that's a big bonus. I can't speak to all hybrid presses, but with like She Writes Press, what sets them apart is that number one, they do vet. So they probably take about 7% of their submissions. So it's not a vanity press. You don't need an agent to get picked up by them, but you definitely, they are vetting their submissions. And the second positive thing about them, it's probably even more important, is that they have traditional distribution through Ingram. So we are in libraries and bookstores all over the country and in some cases the world. So that's very hard to get, as you know, with self-publishing. So you kind of ride that sort of middle ground. You have a lot of input into your cover and all of that kind of stuff. But so it's, in some ways you have the advantage of being traditionally published because you're distributed, but there's a lot that you have to do too to contribute to the success of your book. So that's the short answer.
And again, not trying to get into your business too much, but what about rights? Do they have the rights, or do you retain the rights, or how does that go?
No, great question. No, I retain all of the rights. So they have the right to publish in English worldwide. But if I wanted to take the book and self-publish it next month, I could do that. Or I want to try to sell the foreign rights, I own the rights.
And and again, I'm not trying to start a fictional fight between you and your press, but what if you as an author, let's just not you, but an author was with a press like this and they're like, I just don't think this is working for me, even though it's doing fine. Can you just pull out immediately, or is it a contract? Are you on a contract for a certain amount of years with your titles?
No, you do have a contract, but no, you can pull out at any time. And I know some authors who have done that, who wanted to continue their series on their own, and they were perfectly able to do that.
I think the hybrid thing is a great idea, and it seems to obviously works very well for you. I'm looking at your books; the quality is huge. I got a few specific questions I want to ask you about that in just a moment, but I've spoken to, well, gosh, I used to say dozens, but who knows? We might be over dozens of authors on this show over the years, and I've spoken to plenty of them. Even if they didn't go and say it on the show, but offline, they'd say, yeah, I was traditional and then I went self and I've made more money than I've ever made and I'm happier. and I can put out 10 times more product because the publisher takes forever. And then they still expect me to market everything, and they still expect me to, because, most people, this, I'm sure when you speak to writers groups, you're having to explain, look, there's only one Stephen King. There's one Harlan Coben. Okay. There's, you just go down the list, but, I like the idea of retaining control and, getting stuff done and getting it into the hands of people. I mean, I've literally have a few fans of my work who track me down and say, when is this next book coming? And I can actually kind of tell them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but I've had a few who bounced back from, they were traditional, they got out, and then they went back because some needed that structure, and some felt that the distribution, as you discussed, was just too much of a plum, But let's talk about this. I am looking at on my screen. I am looking at A Child Lost. I just pulled this one up, and I love the cover. It's got this beautiful spiral staircase. It's a lovely cover. But here's what I want to know, and Michelle may or may not tell me. But your Amazon listings are gorgeous. They are so well thought out. You have all these wonderful book review quotes. You have a lovely, Downton Abbey meets Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, boom, right at the top. And then you have all this. Then you have a great blurb about what the book's about. And you go down, and you even have some wonderful from the publisher graphics going on. Is that something that your press does for you?
Well, it's a good question. No, well, interesting. So one of the advantages of being with a hybrid press or Shiraz press, let's just say that, is that, all of your metadata is handled. So I don't need to worry about uploading like to Kobo and Google and all of that. So that's great. And they will handle your Amazon pages. And I had the normal standard Amazon page like anybody else does, but I went to the IBPA conference, which is the Independent Book Publishers Association conference. And, you go to these conferences and you try to get something from them. And they had a panel about how to make your Amazon pages really pop. And I started looking at, sort of like Kate Morton or the big names in my genre. And I saw what they were doing, and I knew that Shiraz Press is never going to, pay a designer to do this. So I wrote to my project manager and I said, hey, Lauren, if I provide you with these graphics and I want you to revamp my page, will you do that? And she said, sure. So she, I paid a designer to do all those graphics and, sent them over to her. It takes, because I'm a self-published author and I don't have control of my page, it's great that I have somebody to do it, but it's hard because then I have to wait weeks for them to negotiate it and to work it all out. And this has been going back and forth for, a couple of months. So I super appreciate that you you saw it. That's awesome.
It leapt right off the page at me. And I'll just say this is okay, listeners, by the time you hear this, you will have heard who this person is, and I'm not going to say, but I interviewed an author from Australia recently, and he's very successful. He's very prolific. I mean, he's the type of guy who just cranks out a new book like every couple of months, it seems like. But anyway, he sent me a nice note after our interview. See, some people still talk to me after an interview, Michelle. See, this is all good. Relax. It's going to be fine.
Got it.
And he says, I checked out, I'm not going to do an Australian accent, mate, but he said, I checked out your books. They look interesting, but your pages are shite, man. He's like, you need to do this, and this thing. And I'm like, oh, I know. I've been meaning to hire somebody because I'm terrible at doing my own blurbs and stuff like that. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, tell me what's wonderful about your first child. Well, I don't know that she's great, anyway. So I was like, okay, I appreciate that. And I took it in the spirit he meant. He cared enough about me as a person and respected me enough just looking at what I'd done to say, you know what, you can do better.
Wow, that's great.
So I wrote him back and I said, thank you. And I'll get on that. And I just said, incidentally, do you know anybody who's really good at this? Who does yours? And he writes back, well, I do. And I'm like, I hate your guts. But then he writes me back and he says, here, I did your first one for you for free. Go forth and send no more.
You're kidding.
Yeah, not kidding. He's a sweetheart. He's a total sweetheart. And I'll tell you that he's a sweetheart, but he writes the most dark stuff you'll ever want to look at in your life. Yeah, I can't sleep when I read his stuff. But I will tell you this. I did it. And a month later, it's anecdotal, can't prove it. Sales on that book did increase a little bit on
You're
my
kidding.
monthly on Amazon. I'm not kidding. And I went immediately and I did it on all of them. Now, are they perfect? Are they as good as yours? No. But now that I'm looking at yours, I'm thinking, I got to get these cool graphics. So folks here, listen up. You have links in the show notes. I want you to go, if you're a writer, I want you to go to Michelle's books and look at this. Look how beautiful. This is how, in my opinion, every book should look. It should look this good. And if you don't have all these great reviews, if you don't have all that stuff, make them up. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. But if you don't, but the way you're going to get great reviews is to make sales and get people to read them. So that's the next question, Michelle Cox. I'm going to ask you this here. You ready? Here we go.
Okay.
How do you do it? How do you get all these wonderful reviews? I mean, Kirkus is, I understand how Kirkus works and some of these others, but you are obviously great at getting readers to weigh in on your books.
Thanks. Yeah, part of that was that I hired a PR firm for the first, I think, 4 books. And that is something that Sherry's Press hugely encourages you to do. They do not provide any marketing. And they don't force you to hire somebody, but their whole thing is a lot about education. So Brooke Warner, who is the publisher, that's kind of her mantra is, this sort of like empowering women and educating them so that when they come through the Sherry's Press process, even if you go on to something else, traditional self, whatever, her goal is for you to have a complete behind the scenes look at, what's going on. So they highly encourage you to hire a PR firm, not only because it will help educate you, help get your book out there, but also to kind of get some of that high hanging fruit, like a Kirkus review or a Booklist review or a spread. So I've had my books, on Popsuger and Buzzfeed and all those kind of things that I think it would be pretty impossible for just, a lone author to do that. So a lot of that was down to that PR company. And then after that, some of the other, non-trade reviews were just putting the book on a book tour, so, or which has been hugely successful. I highly recommend that to any authors out there. It's definitely worth the money to have these professional bookstagrammers reading and reviewing your books and putting them up on Instagram. And, they have thousands and thousands of followers. So that's amazing coverage right there. So, and then you can always, pull quotes from, whatever they put up on their, Instagram or their websites. And so, it's kind of a win-win.
Michelle, I by trade, my day job, I am a PR guy, and I've been for almost 30 years. But yeah, but here's ready for this. But ready for this? Cobbler's children have no shoes. I'm just not. Don't get me wrong. I've been on TV. I've placed some things here, but I haven't done what I would have done for a client. I'll be honest with you. I've been rather just ad hoc with it. And the more I get reinforcement from great writers who know how to get their stuff in people's hands like you, the more I listen to it, the more I think, I've really missed the boat on my series on trying to do this. So I am looking at the whole thing with my next release to try to kind of do a look back and a book tour, just try to get some interest in the whole series generated again, because I had, and this is strange, and I wonder if you have, I don't know how your sales go, and again, but mine have been a kind of hit or miss the past 2 years, but it just seems like I did do a couple of things towards the end of last year. It was kind of a semi-book toury kind of thing to do. It got published in a few places around. And then I did some actual Amazon advertising for the first time. And I had the highest royalties I've had in probably a year in December. So
wow.
There's work to be done, right? Is my point. And if you're just waiting for people to come find you because you write a good story, well, guess what? There are lots of people who write a good story, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's really tough.
What would you say? You're an avid blogger. What would you say? Does that have an effect on? Not to be crass, but is that created in part to try to drive people to buy your books, or is that just a complete different labor of love?
No. When I hired the PR company at first, I was starting from zero. I mean, I didn't even have a cell phone. I had a cell phone, but I didn't have a smartphone. I had no online presence at all, zero. and I had no wish to be. And they said, well, who are you going to sell books to? I'm like, I don't know, people at church. They're like, oh my God, come on. You've got to think globally. I'm like, okay. They're like, you need a website, you need a newsletter, you need a blog, you need all of these things. And they really helped me to develop those. And I really was resistant on the blog because I thought, the world does not need another blog about, how to write. Like, I'm not going to do that. So I kept trying to think of ideas and I would send it over to my PR person. And she's like, this is a great essay. It's on a blog, try again. And so finally I thought, you know what? I was trying to think of something in brand, because they're all about branding. So I thought, I have these like 200 stories from the nursing home. Why don't I turn these into a blog? And it's kind of same era, same kind of feel, same kind of look. And they loved it. They're like, yeah, let's do that. So they helped me with the first few. And then I said, you know what, because they only wanted them to be like 400 words. And I'm like,
Right.
I, I, I don't care. I'm going to put the whole story in the way I want to put it in. And if people don't like it, whatever.
It's like just back to charting, like you did with the charting.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I couldn't help myself. Yeah. So what is neat about the blog, though, is that it has its own following. So I have people who are huge followers of the blog who wait for the story to come out every week, but they don't necessarily read my books. There's definitely some crossover, but I just think that that's amazing that it has enough interest and enough legs to have formed its own little group of people. And I tell the story once in a while. I think it's so amazing. So I was downstate Illinois. I live in Chicago suburbs. I was downstate Illinois with my brother, and we happened to go to this, auction, farm auction or something in the middle of nowhere. And my brother's like, oh, come on, get a ticket, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I go to the booth to get my, give my information, get my ticket. And I wrote my name, and the woman said, are you Michelle Cox, the author? I'm like, well, yes, I am. And she said, I read your blog every week and I love it. Wow. I'm like, oh my God. So I don't know if she'd ever heard of my books, but she loved the blog. And I'm like, okay, that's made it, done.
That's just the craziest thing. I mean, that's, and and I'm looking at the blog right now, and there'll be a link in the show notes, folks. But like we talked about how you've got these people. You got this most recent one, Proud of Working in the Clouds. You got this young, beautiful couple on the edge of their lives, and it's just, I love this stuff, and I so respect that. I think we spend a lot of time as a society glorifying people for the wrong reasons. I think the idea, you may not necessarily be glorifying these folks, but you're giving them respect and the dignity they deserve for their lives, and I love that. So kudos to you on that. I respect that, and I'm going to have to get on your mailing list for that. So if there is a few on our closing minutes, sadly, I've already talked your ear off. I apologize. But what do you think are the pros and cons of being? You talked about how you didn't have any social media presence until you got into writing, and now or any online presence to speak of, as you said. What are the pros and cons of being out there besides being recognized at auctions?
Well, it's a great time, I think, to be an author, right? Because you have so many opportunities. The gatekeepers are sort of going away. If you want to put a book up on Amazon, you can tomorrow. Nothing's going to stop you. But with that comes an increased competition. So it's pretty hard, as you know. There's, I think, 1 million books published a year between self-publishing and traditional. So that's really hard to stand out. And I think that even if you are traditionally published, I think that there's only so much money in that book buying, bag. So I think that that's a kind of a trap that some traditional authors are falling into, is because they might get a $50,000 advance, but their book only sells $30,000, which for me, that would be amazing. But because they had been paid out for 50, they're considered a failure by the house. And so then they might find it more difficult to get, a second book deal. So, it's kind of set up for failure in some ways, I think, because it's sort of an archaic system. But like you said, I think that there are a lot of traditionally published authors who are moving over to self. And I sometimes wonder, though, if they're successful because they've already have a following.
Good question.
That they've brought with them. Because I think it's pretty hard to do to have that level of success just starting from zero. So
and I see people who, and not just see people I just interview here, but friends who are writers and authors, and some of them just were white hot for a number of years, for a couple of years as selves. And I have one who dipped out into traditional out of self and stalled out there terribly. Kind of like you said, got a little advance, but he was in stasis for basically a year while they got that book out, right? Basically, because it was a full out, traditional pub deal. And then he's like, and then I think the house started to fold anyway. So he got out and then he went back in, and then he was just cold as self pub. He'd lost his equity. Is that the right word? And so I don't know. I tell you this, if, like, for example, my series, I'm finishing up book 8, maybe the last book. Sorry, listeners, probably is. And, but if it is, I would like, and I don't know, tell me if I'm crazy, Michelle, I might just try again. Not even pitch saying I wrote all these self-pub books, just leave it off there. Just get my new book written and try to get an agent and pitch it. Or do you think that's just crazy? You're beating your head against the wall.
Oh, that's so funny. Now I'm the one that gets to say, oh, well, speaking of that, now I have actually written 2 standalone novels that I am trying to pitch traditionally. So I'm kind of in the middle of that whole process. Because no one's going to pick up the series at that point. At this point, I know that. And I think I've kind of run my course with She Writes Press. They're a great outfit and I learned a ton. But, it is expensive, and I feel like I need to go in another direction. And part of the reason that I want a traditional deal is really because I just want an agent. I want somebody to help me manage my career. Do this, don't do this, here's what we think you should do. And the secret is that I'm hoping that if I have, a good agent, they will have an in-house sort of film Hollywood connection that I am hoping to sell, the film rights or the Netflix rights or whatever you want to say to the series. Because I'm not exaggerating. I've probably gotten 1,000 letters from readers saying, when will this be on Netflix? This would be a great Netflix series. And I'm like, you tell me. So
that's the ultimate that's the ultimate compliment, when the readers think you're so good at creating that visual in their head that they can see it on their TV in their mind's eye. That's a huge compliment to you. I agree. I'm with you on that. Great minds think alike. I think part of it, I think it's 2 things for me. I'm going to speak for me for just a second, because you're saying, Alex, you're not very good at that, but all right, hear me out. Let's see what happens. Part is 2 things for me. Regular listeners, tune out for 5 seconds. I've said this before. My grandfather wrote for 50 years, mid-lister, Westerns, historical fiction. Yeah. Idol of mine. He was self-publishing back in his day. Now he died in the late 90s. That was Vanity Press only. You don't do that stuff. He was all with like double D Westerns, all that stuff. But I think I partially crave the imprimatur. I crave the scepter going on my shoulder saying, yes, you are the gatekeeper, saying you are sirloin of beef, you have published a book, with us. I think that's part of it, to be straight up with you. I'm a man in my 50s. This is how I've been bred to think, right? But I think there's that, and then there's, like you say, it's like, well, what if I can write something new, pick up an agent, get it published, and the agent's like, I like the cut of your jib, which is also indicative of how old I am that I said the cut of your jib. And they start sniffing around, say, remember that thing you wrote back on your own? Maybe we can get some cheddar out of that on Netflix. So I see what you're up to, I think, here. And I think it's smart.
Thanks. I'm trying. It's, what else can you do? You have to keep sort of pivoting and try to find something that works.
All right. I've already talked too long, but I have to ask you a couple quick lightning round questions, and then I'll let you get on with your with your best-selling life here. All right, here we go. 1, do you write every day?
I do, every single day, even on Christmas sometimes.
Get out of here, really?
Do,
oh my gosh. Well, I wish I could say that. That's part of my problem. But 2, okay. And do you write a set number of words or set number of hours?
Good question. It kind of depends on what my goal is. So I try to write for an hour a day. But not last year, but 2019, I challenged myself to write 2 books in 1 year. So I wanted to write one of the series books, and then I also wanted to write a standalone. And I figured out that the only way that's going to happen is I need 3 months to write the draft, 3 months to edit for 1 book. Next book, 3 months to write, 3 months to edit. So I had to have a word limit, word count goal. So I think it was 2,000 words a day in order to hit that goal. So right now I'm kind of slacking off a bit because of COVID and there's like 1 million people in the house right now, and it's all crazy and whatever.
I you know what? This is weird, I guess. Or maybe it's not. I write better when there's nobody in the house. I don't know why. That's weird, isn't it?
I don't know. It is. Even though they're all in their own room and they're Zooming, everybody's doing their own Zoom thing, it's still really hard to just totally get into that world and stay in that world long enough to start, creating.
I saw 60 Minutes the other night. Colson Whitehead was interviewed by John Dickerson, and they showed him how he writes. And I kind of the similar way he writes with loud music jamming, right? And you don't do that. His wife's a literary agent. And they share kind of a partitioned office. I don't know how she gets any work done, but that's kind of how I write too. I need music. I don't have to have it like top of the, it doesn't have to be turned up to 11, but I like to have music or something just so I can tune out everything else.
For me, it has to be silent, completely silent. So.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. Last question. This is a hard one. I hope you're ready for this. This hard-heading. Yeah. The hard-heading interview is about over, but you got to get past this one or it's all for naught. Where do we buy your books? Should we go to michellecoxauthor.com or where do you want us to go?
You know what? You can go to michellecoxwrites.com. I have buy links there, but it's Amazon, Kobo, your local bookstore. If it's not there, they can order it, or your library. Anywhere, really.
I'll have you know, my good guest, that I'm looking at your Amazon page and I have a link to my local library extension, and there are 3 copies available of A Child Lost. I think only one's available of the 3 though, so somebody's reading it. And so I think that's fantastic. So I love that, getting into libraries. I think I kind of started to cycle out of libraries though, because, I'm not Michelle Cox, but I'll tell you what, it's exciting, folks. I am adding all these books to my stack by my bedside and or my Kindle. It's funny. I get all these books in there and the Kindle doesn't gain an ounce. I don't know what his secret is, but anyway, Michelle, thank you for putting up with this all over the road interview. I've really enjoyed meeting you, and I think we've all learned a lot.
Thanks, Alex. This was really fun. It was a great interview. I really appreciate the time.
Anytime. You got to keep us in mind when you come back with your next big book. Got it?
I will. Thank you.
Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, huh? Not quite Mysterious Goings On, listeners. You probably haven't got the brand new Mysterious Goings On official t-shirt. This is a quality cotton t-shirt coming in a premium unisex tee version and a women's slim fit tee version in all the sizes you could possibly need. These are great quality shirts coming in a variety of colors, including dark heather gray, black, charcoal, maroon. And on the women's t-shirt, we come in dark heather gray, black, charcoal, indigo, and midnight navy. There you go. Check them out. They are in the show notes. The link is right there. They're being sold on Bonfire. They're typically sold in batches, and they'll come at you pretty quickly. All the instructions are on the website. The link is in the show notes here or at mgopod.com. Again, show the world, well, at least show the world on Zoom, or show the world when we can finally really get out and about. Show the world that you have some mysterious goings-ons of your own by wearing our t-shirt, and help support this show. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.